The dog was already moving before Dominic Reyes understood what he was seeing. It was the third hour of a gray November afternoon on the corner of Fulton and Vance, and the wind off the river had teeth. Two men in hooded jackets had stepped up to the cart, one of them sweeping a sleeve across the table so that the small foil packets of roasted nuts scattered onto the wet pavement, while the second reached past the old man for the coffee can where the morning's money sat. The old man's hand closed around the can. He did not let go. He was 81 years old and weighed maybe 130 pounds in his coat, and he did not let go. And that was the moment the German shepherd named Bishop crossed 40 feet of sidewalk, without a sound, and put himself between the old man and the two who had come to take what little he had. Dominic was still 3 steps behind. That was the thing he would turn over in his mind 4 weeks afterward. The way the dog had read it, first the way the dog had not waited for the word that lived in Dominic's throat. Bishop did not bite. He did not lunge. He simply arrived, planted 80 pounds of muscle and certainty, ears up, chest low, every line of him saying no further. The taller man froze with his hand still extended toward the coffee can. The shorter one took a step back, and his heel caught the curb. For one held second, nobody on that corner breathed. Then Dominic closed the gap, and his voice was very quiet and very level, the voice he had used in places far from here. He told the 2 men it was time to walk away. He did not raise a hand. He did not have to. If this is the kind of story that stays with you after the screen goes dark, the kind about loyalty and the people the world forgets, take a moment to subscribe and stay until the end. What happened on that corner was only the beginning of it. The 2 men went. They went the way men go. When the math has changed, fast and graceless, the taller one muttering something the wind took, the shorter one not looking back. They left the foil packets on the pavement and the old man standing with a coffee can pressed against his chest, and a German shepherd sitting at his feet as if he had been posted there his whole life. Dominic Reyes was 39 years old, a Marine for 16 of those years, before a roadside in another country rearranged the plan, and he had the build of a man who had carried heavy things over long distances, broad through the shoulders, a little stiff now in the left knee when the cold came in. His hair was cut close and going gray at the temples ahead of schedule. There was a pale seam of scar along the right side of his jaw that he had stopped noticing years ago. His eyes were the part people remembered, a flat, steady brown that moved across a room and counted it, the eyes of someone who never quite stopped scanning doors and exits and the hands of strangers. He had come to this city 6 weeks earlier for no reason he could have defended out loud. A cousin had offered a spare room. The room was enough. He had not planned to stay. He knelt and gathered the scattered packets, brushing the grit from the foil, and set them back on the table in a neat row. The old man watched him do it. Up close, the vendor was smaller than he had looked from across the street, his face a topography of deep lines, a gray wool cap pulled down over ears gone translucent with age, his hands knotted at the knuckles and steady despite everything. He wore a canvas coat that had been patched at the elbows with a darker canvas, and the patches were sewn straight, the work of someone who took care. "You did not have to do that," the old man said. His accent carried something old in it, a rounding of the vowels. "But thank you. The dog did it," Dominic said. "I just walked." The old man looked down at Bishop, who looked back up at him with the calm attention he gave to people he had decided about. Slowly the old man crouched, his knees making a sound like a door, and he held out the back of his hand. Bishop leaned in and pressed his nose to it, once, and then sat again. The old man's eyes were wet, though it might only have been the wind. His name was Tomas Varga. He had run the cart on that corner for 26 years. He told Dominic this while he straightened his table, not as a complaint, but the way a man states the boundaries of his country. 26 winters. He knew the names of the dogs that passed and the people who walked them. He knew which of the building supers would let him fill his water jug and which would not. He sold roasted nuts and pretzels and coffee from a thermos, and in the summer cold, bottled water, and he made on a good day enough. On a bad day, he made less. Today had been heading toward a good day until the two men came. Dominic did not leave right away. He told himself he was waiting to be sure the men did not circle back. That was partly true. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets and watched the coroner the way he watched everything, and Bishop lay down against the base of the cart with his chin on his paws, and Thomas sold a coffee to a woman in scrubs and a bag of nuts to a man waiting for a bus. The light went the color of slate. Around 5, the foot traffic thickened and then thinned again, and Tomas began the slow ritual of packing up. And Dominic found himself helping without being asked, folding the table legs, lifting the propane ring, and he understood somewhere in the middle of it that he had decided something without telling himself first. "You will come back," Thomas said. It was not a question. He had the certainty of a man who had been reading people on a street corner for 26 years. "The dog likes it here." Dominic almost smiled. "The dog goes where I go." "Then you will come back," Tomas said, and pushed the cart toward the alley where he chained it for the night. And that was the first day. He did come back, he told himself. It was the dog. Bishop had come to him 3 years earlier, through a program that paired veterans with shepherds who had washed out of other work, dogs too independent for the line they had been bred to, and the two of them had recognized something in each other on the first afternoon. Bishop was 6 now, in his prime, tan and black with a saddle of darker fur across his back and one ear that carried a small old notch from before Dominic's time. He was disciplined in the way that looked like calm and was actually a constant low engine of attention. He did not bark at nothing. When he moved, there was a reason, and Dominic had learned to trust the dog's read of a situation, a half-second before his own, which on that corner had turned out to be the difference between a robbery and a story that ended otherwise. By the end of the first week, he knew the rhythm of the block. He knew that Tomas arrived at 6:40 and that the woman who ran the dry cleaner 2 doors down, a brisk gray-haired woman named Inés Delgado, brought him a paper cup of her own coffee most mornings and took a bag of nuts in trade, though she never ate them, gave them to her grandson, she said. He knew the young man at the corner store, Marcus, who was 19, and saving for something he would not name, and who watched the street with the same habit of attention Dominic recognized in himself. He knew that the corner was a small economy of people keeping a loose eye on one another, the kind of arrangement that does not have a name and does not need one until it is threatened. It was threatened. That was the thing he came to understand, slowly, the way you understand weather changing. The two men who had come to the cart had not been random. They came back, not to the cart, but to the block, and they were not alone. He first saw the car on the second Tuesday, a dark sedan, clean, out of place on a street where the cars were old and salted and dented, idling at the far end of the block with its engine running and its windows just dark enough. It sat for 20 minutes and then pulled away. He noted the way Bishop's ears tracked it, the way the dog rose halfway and then settled when Dominic put a hand flat on his shoulder. He said nothing to Tomas. He filed it. He saw it again on Thursday, and this time a man got out, and the man walked the length of the block slowly, with a phone to his ear, looking at the storefronts the way an appraiser looks at a house. He was somewhere in his late 40s, well dressed in a charcoal overcoat that had no business being that clean, his hair combed back, his shoes wrong for the wet. He stopped in front of the dry cleaner and looked at it for a while. He stopped in front of the corner store. He did not stop at the cart, but as he passed it, his eyes went to Tomas, and then to the dog at Tomas's feet, and something flickered across his face, a small recalculation, and then he was gone. That evening, Dominic asked Tomas if anyone had come around offering to buy the businesses on the block. The old man went still over the propane ring. Then he straightened and looked down the empty street the way he looked at things he had decided not to be afraid of. A company, Thomas said. They have a name that means nothing. Meridian something. They came to Inez first. They want the building she rents in. They want the corner store. They have been buying this whole side of the avenue, one door at a time, and the ones who do not sell, things happen to them. Small things. A window, a delivery that does not come, a health inspector who finds problems that were never there. He set the propane ring in the cart with great care. I do not own anything they can buy. I own a cart and a coffee can, and yet I am on the corner. And the corner is what they want to be empty when the buyers come to look at it. An old man and his cart are not the picture they wish to sell. Dominic was quiet. The pressure in his chest tightened in a way he had not felt since the other country. He had seen this before in a different language, the patient pressure of people with money and time against people with neither, the way the strong arranged the world to look, the way they needed it to look. Why not tell the police, he said, and even as he said it, he knew the shape of the answer. I have, Tomas said. Twice. A report is made. Nothing in the report is a crime yet. A window breaks. Who broke it? A man walks down a street. That is not a crime. They are very careful. They have lawyers who are paid to be careful. He pulled the gray cap lower. I am 81. I have buried a wife and a country. I am not afraid of two men in hoods. I am only tired. And I am one old man, and they are a company with a name that means nothing. Stay with this. What the old man could not see yet, standing in the cold with his cart half-packed, was that he was no longer one old man. He was simply the last one who had not realized it. Dominic did not promise anything that night. He had learned a long time ago what promises cost when you could not keep them, and still he walked the block before he left, slowly, the way the man in the charcoal coat had walked it. And he looked at it the way that man had looked at it, and he began, without deciding to count. He counted the cameras first. There was one over the door of the corner store, a cheap dome that Marcus said had not recorded anything in 2 years. Just a deterrent, a plastic shell. There was one inside the dry cleaner, pointed at the register. There was nothing on the cart, nothing on the corner itself, no eye on the public space where the two men had swept the nuts onto the ground. That was the gap. The pressure happened in the gap, in the places no one was looking, and the company had been careful to operate only there. So he changed where people looked. It started small, the way these things do. He began arriving with Tomas in the mornings and staying through the afternoons. He brought a folding stool and a thermos of his own, and he sat near the cart with the dog, and he was simply present, a large, still man with a German shepherd, and presence is its own kind of camera. The first morning he did it, Tomas had tried to wave him off, saying a young man had better things to do than sit in the cold watching an old one sell coffee. Dominic had only poured himself a cup from his thermos and said that the cold did not bother him and the company was good. And after that, Tomas stopped arguing. The two of them fell into a rhythm of long silences broken by small talk about the weather and the people who passed, and Thomas began, in pieces, to tell him things. About the wife, Sophia, who had stood at this cart beside him for the first 9 winters before her heart gave out. About the country he had left at 20 with a single suitcase. About the way a corner becomes a kind of marriage, for better and worse, if you tend it long enough. The dark sedan came on the following Tuesday and idled at the end of the block and did not stay. The 2 men in hoods did not come at all. The company, Dominic understood, did not like to be watched, and a man who sat still and watched back was an expense they had not budgeted for. He knew, though, that presence alone would not be enough, because he could not be on the corner forever, and the company had more time than he did. He needed the gap closed in a way that did not depend on him standing in it. He needed the corner to have eyes that kept their record. He went to Marcus. The young man at the corner store had been watching the same slow siege from behind his own counter, and he had the thing Dominic lacked, which was a knowledge of the inexpensive technology of the present age. Dominic found him restocking the cooler one slow evening, and he laid it out plainly, the sedan and the 2 men, and the gap in the corner where no eye watched. Marcus listened with his jaw working, and when Dominic finished, the young man set down the carton of milk in his hand and said that his uncle had run a bodega 4 blocks over, and that the same company, or one wearing the same coat, had taken it 2 winters back, and that his uncle had not been the same man since. He said it flatly, the way young men say the things that have cut them deepest. Then he said he was in. Over 2 evenings, with $80 Dominic put on the counter and 40 Marcus added without being asked, they mounted a small weatherproof camera under the lip of the corner store's awning, angled down across the cart and the stretch of sidewalk where the table stood. Marcus climbed the stepladder in the cold while Dominic held it steady, and Bishop sat at the base watching the street both ways, and they tested the angle 3 times until the whole width of the cart sat clean in the frame. They ran the wire to a little box inside that kept a week of footage and wrote over itself, and Marcus showed Dominic how to pull a clip and keep it, his fingers quick on the keys, patient with the older man's slowness. It was an eye in the gap, it was the corner, finally looking back. Inez came into it next, though Dominic did not recruit her so much as she recruited herself. She had watched him sitting with the cart for a week, and one morning she set a paper cup of coffee on his stool beside the dog and sat down on the milk crate she carried out, and said in the flat tone of a woman who had run a business on that block for 30 years that the man in the charcoal coat had come into her shop again and named a number, and that the number was lower than the last number, and that he had mentioned, while smiling, that the neighborhood was changing and a woman her age might want to think about her health. She said the word health, the way you would hold something rotten at arm's length. He threatened you, Dominic said. He complimented me, Inez said. It is the same thing in a better coat. She looked at Bishop, who had laid his head against her knee, and her hard face did something it did not usually do. 20 years that company has been swallowing streets. I have a daughter who says, Sal, take the money. What do you owe a corner? And maybe she is right. And still I keep thinking about Tomas. He has nothing they can buy and nowhere they can move him. And so when they cannot buy a man, what do they do to him? She did not finish it. She did not have to. The thing Dominic had learned in the service, the thing that had nothing to do with weapons, was that strength is mostly a matter of who is alone. The company's whole method depended on facing one frightened person at a time, one shop, one lease, one old man on one corner, each of them convinced they were the last one standing. break that, and the arithmetic that made them strong stopped working. He did not say this to anyone in those words. He simply started bringing people into the same room. It was Inez who had the room, the back of the dry cleaner, where she kept the steam press and a small table, and on a Thursday evening in the first week of December 7, people sat around it. Tomas, his cap in his hands, Inez, arms crossed. Marcus, 19, and trying to look older. A man named Father Okafor from the church on the next block, who had buried half the old people on the avenue and had his own quiet count of the doors that had gone dark. A woman named Riza, who ran the laundromat and had sold 6 months ago, and could not look at Thomas while she said why. A retired transit worker named Dell, who lived above the corner store and saw everything from his window and remembered all of it, and Dominic, with the dog lying across the doorway like a closed gate. He did not run the meeting. He had learned that the man who runs the meeting becomes the meeting, and the moment he left, it would collapse. Instead, he asked questions and let the room answer itself. When had each of them first been approached? What had been said? What had happened to the ones who refused? The room was slow to warm. Riza kept her coat on and her eyes on the floor. Dell sat with his arms folded and said he had seen plenty and trusted none of it to matter. Father Okafor spoke first in the even voice of a man used to filling silences and named the doors on the avenue that had gone dark in 3 years, counting them on his fingers, 11 of them, each with a family he had known by name. Then Dell, almost against his will, said the sedan came on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that he had started writing the Times because a man his age did not sleep much, and the writing gave the watching a purpose. Then Reza, still not looking up, said she had sold in June because a brick had come through her front window in May and the glass cost more than a month of rent, and the man in the coat had been so kind about it, so very kind, offering to take the trouble off her hands. Slowly, around that table, with Inez writing it down on the back of dry-cleaning tickets, in a hand that got steadier as she went, a pattern assembled itself out of 7 separate fears that had each believed they were alone. A broken window, 2 days after a no, a fire inspection, 1 week after another, a supplier who suddenly would not deliver, none of it, a crime by itself, all of it laid end to end on the back of the tickets, a thing with a shape. Bishop lay across the doorway through all of it, and twice, when a voice in the room climbed toward panic, the dog lifted his head and the voice came back down, as if the animal were keeping a kind of order none of them had asked him to keep. "This is nothing," Reza said quietly. "This is a list of bad luck. They have lawyers." "It is not nothing, Father," Okafor said. "It is testimony. A lawyer can argue one window. A lawyer has a harder time with 12 people who all had the same bad luck the same week they each said no to the same man." Dominic let that sit. Then he said the only sentence he said all night that sounded like a plan. "We stop being 12 people. We start being one record. They built it over 3 weeks. It was not dramatic work. It was the opposite of dramatic, which was why it had a chance of working where drama would have failed." Dell, from his window above the store, began writing down the sedan, the days, the times, the plate when he could see it, in a notebook with a date on every page. Marcus learned to save the clips from the awning camera onto a drive and label them, and one of those clips, from the second Friday in December, showed the 2 men in hoods crossing the frame at dusk and stopping at the cart, and the taller one pointing a finger an inch from Thomas's face, while the shorter one stood lookout, 3 full minutes of it. The audio thin, but the gesture unmistakable. And then the German shepherd rising into the frame and the 2 men leaving. Inez collected the tickets where each refusal and each piece of bad luck had been written down, and she made copies and kept the copies somewhere that was not her shop. Father Okafor, who knew people, found a young attorney at a legal aid office across the city who had built her short career on exactly this kind of patient documentary work against exactly this kind of patient pressure. A woman named Priya Sandoval. She came on a Saturday in a second-hand wool coat with a worn leather bag, younger than they had expected, and she sat in the back of the dry cleaner with the stack of tickets and Dell's notebook and a laptop running the awning clips, and she listened for 2 hours without once telling them it was hopeless, which was more than any of them had gotten from any one official. She asked hard questions. She asked who could testify and who would fold under a lawyer's stare. She asked whether the camera had been mounted on private property and was relieved to hear it sat under Marcus's own awning. End quote. When she was done, she closed the laptop and rubbed her eyes and then said the words none of them had let themselves hope for, which were that this was buildable. Thomas, who had not spoken the whole time, asked her quietly why she would take this on for people who could not pay her. She looked at him for a long moment and said her own grandmother had been moved out of a building 3 times before she died, each time by a kinder letter than the last, and that she had become a lawyer for no other reason than this. The company felt the change. They could not have known the shape of it, but they felt the temperature shift on the block, the way a predator feels a herd close ranks. The pressure escalated as Dominic had known it would, because pressure that is being resisted always escalates before it breaks. On a Monday morning, Tomas arrived at his cart to find the chain cut and the cart tipped, the propane ring bent, the coffee can gone with the float of small bills he kept to make change. The packets of nuts had been ground into the wet pavement under a heel, and the thermos lay in the gutter with its lid sprung. It was meant to frighten him. It frightened him. He was 81, and it was cold, and his hands shook as he set the cart upright. And he did not call anyone because calling people was not a thing he had ever learned to do. And so he simply began, alone in the gray light, to gather what could be saved. That was how Dominic found him, kneeling on the cold sidewalk, his gray cap pushed back, trying with knotted fingers to bend the propane ring back into a shape that would hold a flame. Dominic crouched beside him and took the ring from his hands, and did not say anything for a moment, and Bishop pressed his whole side against the old man's back, the way he did with people who were trying not to come apart. It was also, Dominic understood the moment he saw it, a mistake, because the awning camera had been running, and at 6:50 that morning, it had recorded a figure crouched at the chain with a bolt cutter, and the figure had looked up once, just once, directly toward the store, and the face that came up was not one of the 2 men in hoods. It was the man in the charcoal overcoat. That clip changed everything, and Dominic knew better than to let anyone celebrate it, because a clip is only as strong as the chain of hands it passes through, and the company had lawyers paid to break chains. He drove the drive across the city himself and put it into Priya Sandoval's hands, and watched her watch it, and he saw the thing in her face that he had been waiting for. The careful excitement of a person who has just been handed the one fact that the careful man on the other side forgot to protect. Because the charcoal-coated man had been careful, exquisitely careful, for years. He had used the 2 men in hoods, so his own hands stayed clean. He had used lawyers and shell companies and a name that meant nothing, so that no thread led back to a person. Then on a cold Monday morning, impatient, certain that an old man on a corner had no eye that mattered, he had done the small dirty work himself in front of a camera he did not know was there, because he had checked the corner store's dome 2 years ago and found it dead and never thought to check again. He had not counted on a Marine and a corner store kid mounting an $80 eye in the one gap he believed was still dark. What came after was not a confrontation. Dominic had promised himself, and, without words, the dog, that it would never come to that, and it never did. There was no scene on the corner, no fist, no raised voice, no weapon. There was paper, and there were institutions, and there was the slow, grinding turn of the things the company had always assumed were on its side. Priya Sandoval took the awning clip and Dell's notebook with its dated plates, and Inez's stack of copied tickets, and the testimony of 12 people who had each thought they were the last one standing. And she went not only to the police, who now had a face attached to a crime that was finally, plainly a crime, but to a reporter at the city paper, who had been trying for 2 years to put a face on the company that meant nothing, and had never been able to until now. The story ran on a Sunday. It named the company, and it named the man, whose name turned out to be ordinary, a man named Garrett Holt, who had an office in a tower across the river and a title that sounded like a kindness, Vice President of Community Acquisitions. The article laid the dated pattern, end to end, the way the tickets had laid it on Ennis's table, the windows and the inspections and the suppliers. And at the center of it was a still frame from an $80 camera under a corner store awning, a man in a charcoal overcoat crouched at a chain with a bolt cutter in his gloved hands looking up. After that, the institutions that had been so careful to find nothing began all at once to find things. The way they do when the cost of looking away finally exceeds the cost of looking. There were investigations. There were other reporters, there were other streets, other Thomases who read the Sunday article and called the legal aid office, and added their own dated bad luck to the record, until the record was too large for any lawyer to argue. Garrett Holt did not go to the corner and apologize. Men like him never do. He did what the careful ones always do when the arithmetic turns, which is disappear, resign, surface, months later, in another city, under another title, leaving behind a company that paid a settlement and dissolved its name and grew a new one because the thing Dominic had fought was older and larger than one man in a coat. He had not destroyed it. No one destroys it. He had done the only thing that ever actually works against it, which is to make one corner of the world too watched, too witnessed, too joined together to be worth the trouble of taking. The company let the avenue go. The dark sedan stopped coming. The 2 men in hoods were never seen on that block again. Thomas kept his corner. That was the part Dominic had not expected to matter as much as it did. Spring came late and grudging that year, the snow turning to gray slush and then to wet pavement, and then one morning in March to a thin, worn light that fell across the cart while Thomas poured coffee for the woman in scrubs. And Dominic stood with his thermos and his stool and his dog and felt something in his chest that he had been outrunning for a long time finally stopped chasing him. He had come to the city for no reason he could name. He had not planned to stay. He had been, for most of his adult life, a man who left, who felt the pull to be somewhere else the moment a place started to feel like it could hold him. Because the places that held you were the places that could be taken, and he had learned early what it cost to lose one. He did not leave Cashaw. He could not have said exactly when the decision happened, only that one afternoon Inez mentioned that the room above her shop was empty and that the last tenant had left it clean, and that she said it without looking at him the way she said the things that mattered most. She named a rent so low it was almost an insult, and when he started to object, she told him she would rather have a tenant who watched the block than $10 more from a stranger. And that was the end of it. He found himself the next week carrying a duffel bag and a dog bed up a narrow stair into a small room with a window that looked down on the corner. The room had a slanted ceiling and a radiator that knocked, and a square of afternoon light that fell across the floorboards. And it was, he realized, standing in the middle of it, the first room in 11 years that he had walked into. Bishop walked the perimeter of the new room once, twice, and then lay down in the patch of light under the window and put his chin on his paws, which was the dog's way of saying that this place, too, had been decided about. Dominic stood at the window a long time that first evening and watched Tomas chain the cart in the alley below, the old man's breath clouding in the cold, and he found that the pull he had felt his whole adult life, the pull to be already gone, was not there. He waited for it. It did not come. There was a gathering near the end of that spring that no one called a celebration because the people on that block did not have the habit of celebrating. But that was what it was. Inez closed the dry cleaner an hour early. Father Okafor came, and Dell and Marcus and Riza, who had sold and could not get her shop back, but who came anyway and stood next to Tomas and was forgiven without anyone needing to say the word. Priya Sandoval came across the river and was made to take a bag of roasted nuts she tried twice to pay for. They set a folding table out on the corner, the same corner, and they put food on it, and for a couple of hours the block was simply full of people who had found out they were not alone, which Dominic had come to believe was the only wealth that the company and men like Garrett Holt could never quite manage to buy or break, because it was made of the one material they had no use for, which was people choosing to stand near each other when it would have been easier and safer to stand apart. Thomas found him near the end of it, when the light was going gold over the river and the others were starting to pack the food away. The old man had his gray cap in his hand. He stood for a moment looking at Dominic, and then down at the dog who had risen and come to lean against the old man's leg the way he had the first afternoon. "My wife used to say that God does not always send what you ask for," Tomas said. "She said sometimes he sends a dog instead, and you have to be paying attention to know it is the same thing." He smiled, his deep-lined face folding around it. "I was not paying attention for a long time. I thought I was the last one on this corner. I thought when I went, the corner went with me." He looked up at Dominic, his eyes wet again, and again it might only have been the light. "You did not give me back my wife or my country. You gave me back the corner, and you gave me people to leave it to." He reached down and rested his knotted hand on Bishop's head. "And you gave me him on the worst afternoon before either of us asked." Dominic did not have words for that, and Thomas did not seem to need him to. They stood together as the gold went out of the light, the old man and the Marine and the German shepherd who had crossed 40 feet of sidewalk before anyone gave him a command, on a corner that one company with a name that meant nothing had decided to make empty, and that 12 people standing together had decided to keep full. You may never stand on a corner like that one. You may never see the dark sedan idling at the end of your block, or watch a man in a clean coat appraise the place where your whole small life is kept. Yet there is a corner somewhere near you. There is always a corner where someone is standing alone and believing they are the last one, where the pressure is happening in the gap because no one is looking. And the truth, that old vendor learned the truth a dog knew before any of them, is that the strong are only strong against people who are alone, and that the moment you cross the sidewalk and stand beside the one who is being taken from, the arithmetic changes for everyone. You do not need to be a Marine to do it. You do not need a dog who moves before the command. You only need to not wait and to not stand apart, and to remember that the people the world forgets are the ones it most needs you to see. May God keep you watchful and keep you kind. May He set you on the corner where you are needed and give you the courage not to wait for a command. And may you never have to stand alone, because someone, somewhere, crossed the distance to stand beside you first.